Thought I advanced it, but all right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks to those who have stayed here in person and online. We're going to continue with 3 more flash presentations before we have a more open panel discussion of the day's speakers. So please do stick around. And our first flash presenter for this afternoon will be Dr. John Volckens, who's a professor of mechanical engineering and the director of the Center for Energy Development and Health at Colorado State University. His research interests include air quality, low-cost sensors, exposure science, and air pollution-related disease. And happy to welcome you to the front. Thank you.
Yeah, this is fun being in the center like this. I'm going to keep turning around and maybe try and look at all of you before this is over. So it wouldn't be a good ethics start with me at disclosing that some of this technology is being commercialized out of my lab. And I think actually a really interesting conversation for questions is the ethics of academic commercialization and trying to take your ideas from lab to market. My talk isn't about those sorts of things, but I have lots of opinions on them. I think interesting ones too, if you want to talk about it later. So it wouldn't be a good air pollution talk for me to at least evangelize my field to you, assuming you aren't air pollution researchers like me. So you probably are familiar with the Global Burden of Disease study. This is a large study put on every 3 years or so by a team of epidemiologists at the University of Washington and globally. Essentially what they do is they try and figure out what's making us sick or die prematurely in terms of risk factors and diseases. So we don't have to walk through this whole plot. I think what's interesting and surprises me is that the number 2 risk factor for premature morbidity and mortality globally is air pollution, which is surprising, I think. And the reason it's particulate matter air pollution, a particular type of air pollution, so smoke is what you could think of, is that these little particles, once they're inhaled, pass through your lungs and get into your blood. From there, they can reach virtually every organ system you have. And so as we start to dig deeper and deeper into the health effects of air pollution, if you look at the colors next to the causes, so the causes are the color wheel there, basically every color is represented. So air pollution affects your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your brain. All of your organ systems are adversely affected by air pollution. That's why it has such a long-term effect. And we don't get to really choose the air we breathe, right? We have to breathe the air that's around us. I think what's also interesting a little bit is that air pollution really isn't commoditized like water is, right? Like we like to think we can buy our water, and in many cases we can have the means, but air is harder to do that. That's maybe changing a little bit. I'll bet some of you have air filters in your homes, and you're filtering your air right now. But it's hard to do, and it's expensive. So when we think about global exposure to air pollution, I'll show you this plot. What you're looking at is the concentration on the x-axis and populations on the y-axis. So who's getting exposed to this really bad level of air pollution? Obviously, India is probably the worst. So we're looking at now, if you look at these dashed lines going down the screen, those are the World Health Organization's goals for countries. 5 micrograms per cubic meter way on the left, that's what they consider to be risk-free air, or the cleanest air possible. And what percent of the global population do you think gets exposed to that air? You can kind of maybe do that little quiz in your head, and you're going to get the answer in about 15 seconds. So we'll go through this quickly. I don't have all the countries in the world here, but I just want to show you a flavor of kind of where we are. This data is maybe 4 years old now, 5 years old, but it's still pretty current. It's hard to change air pollution levels in a short time period. Russia, Japan, and then the rest of the world. Okay, so you can see here that the United States and Europe are maybe the 2 cleanest countries here on the planet. But even the US, if we look at it, is maybe only 10% of the US population gets exposed to 5 micrograms per cubic meter, or more between 5 and 10. The EPA has promulgated a new standard for the US around 8. We'll see if that sticks, given the legislative agendas that we've seen recently. But in general, you can see that most of the world is exposed to levels of air pollution that are unacceptable for health. Okay, so what's in the air we're breathing? That's the next question. It's something we try to answer. PM 2.5, fine particulate air pollution, is the primary driver of poor health. There's a lot in it. If we look at this slide here, there are ionic species, but there are also metals, all kinds of metals. So if you study lead or manganese or cadmium or any other sort of heavy metal, that's in the air we're breathing. It's in the air we're breathing right now. There's also thousands of organic compounds. So if you're interested in PFAS, or if you're interested in benzene or toluene or personal care products, we're also breathing those in constantly. And so it's this really complex mixture of sources that contribute to the particles that we inhale with every breath. So when do the exposures occur? Where do the exposures occur? And for who do they occur, right? It might differ by individual. We're trying to answer these questions with our research. Fortunately, wearable technologies for assessing exposure to air pollution leave a lot to be desired. I think it's great that Dr. Hughes mentioned the workplace. It kind of always comes back to the workplace as the start. I'll show you a brief history of wearable technologies for air pollution exposure assessment. Started in about the 1970s. We can go earlier, but this kind of became mainstream in the 70s. What you're looking at here is a worker who's got a little inlet up near their head, their breathing zone, and then they're wearing a tiny little pump. Think of this little pump as like what powers a fish tank, right? You've probably all seen these little pumps. They go, they're about that loud, and you have a piece of tubing draped across your body and then an inlet. If I asked any of you to wear this technology right now, you might do it on a whim for an hour or two, but if I asked you to do it for a few days, it would be like when I was at the orthodontist as a teenager. He said, now look, John, you're gonna take this headgear and you're gonna put it on and you're gonna wear it to school every day. And I'm just sitting there going, you know. So it's hard to wear this sort of technology for a long period of time. By the 80s, we were able to do this in real time. And so what this poor fellow is wearing is a backpacker's backpack frame with a steel cage welded onto it, and then some real-time air pollution monitors. All right, by 2015, we'd gotten all the stuff smaller to where we could get the backpack smaller, and we'd gotten more sensors in there. There's lots of different flavors of air pollution, but still very expensive. And the problem with all of these technologies, this is kind of what's in the backpack you're looking at here, is that it's too much, it's too heavy, it's too burdensome, it's too expensive. For doing research, you're looking at about $20,000 worth of stuff there. And if you want to do panel-based epidemiology or clinical research, right, $20,000 per participant. This all traces back to occupational exposure. It's loud, it's bulky. It requires someone to calibrate each of these devices before it goes out, right? These aren't kind of fire and forget technologies. So it just takes way too much effort. And the bottom line is we can't get the sample size we need to do research. That's the problem. If you look at occupational surveys, when we look at like going into a workplace to do measurements of what your exposure is, the median number of air samples that's taken when OSHA does a survey, can anyone guess what it is? 0. The median is 0. Typically 3 would be the max, right? And so there's this whole field of epidemiology that tries to infer the shape of a log normal distribution from 3 sample sizes, right? It's just not good enough for doing research. So this is where our work comes in. Can we do, as engineers, can we do some technological innovation to really increase the utility and sample size of personal exposure monitoring so we can better figure out why air pollution is so bad for us? We actually haven't answered that question very well yet. This is where we came in. So we first thought about the pump. That fish tank pump is a big problem. But as you all recall, for the last 10 years, our laptops have gotten really quiet at how they cool themselves, and they cool themselves in different ways. There are these little low-cost efficient micro pumps that are tiny, about the size of a dime, that we started breadboarding up. We also realized at the same time that a lot of the technology that's in here is really cheap and available to us in single components. So we started taking a lot of the sensors that were in this device and pairing it with this pump. And that's what you see in this little breadboarded schematic there. Next, 3D printing allowed us to innovate really quickly and just have a design, try it, didn't work, try it again. So we could very quickly innovate and iterate on how to make a better wearable air pollution monitor. We eventually made a machine design, and eventually that got commercialized. What you're looking at here is a much quieter air sampler, and I'll show you a picture of it in the next slide here. And it's got more sensors in it as well. So not only does it capture air on a little filter that you can assay, but it senses the pollution in real time. It's got a GPS, a light sensor, an accelerometer. So there's a lot of data we can collect about the individual as we start to think about their air pollution exposure. So on the left of this picture, you've got the old, on the right is the new. And this is one of those air samplers here. And it's currently running. Can you even hear that? No, you can't even, trust me, it's running, but it's very quiet, right? This is actually something you might be able to convince someone to wear for a day, walk around in, as opposed to that fish tank tubing, like who wants to have a tube draped across their chest and explain themselves to people on the street. The other thing we did is that we have a Bluetooth radio in here, and so all of this is controlled and powered by a smartphone app that you see on the right. What's interesting is that Apple actually got involved with us early in this development. I think they were more interested in selling computers to people, but they glom onto any academics that use their products. And so they actually did help us design our screen, our programming screen, to look exactly like the Apple home programming screen, because they convinced us, and they were right. Like, people know what the little green thing slider means, and they know how to interact with this sort of interface. And so we adopted that for our programming, for our app. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we've done with this technology so far. As I said before, there's a lot of onboard sensors on this device. You've got a PM sensor for the particles, you've got a VOC sensor for the gases, you've got a light sensor. We use light, so we use visible and UV light to tell whether you're indoors or outdoors. There's not a lot of UV light indoors. And so with a GPS, that's not perfect, but once we get a UV signal, we know the wearer is outdoors. Then of course, the accelerometer can give us steps and other sorts of things. When we combine that data with GPS data that this has, and land use data, which we can get from Google Maps or anyone else, we can actually start to answer these questions of what you're doing, where you are, when you're getting exposed to air pollution. Now, this is for an occupational scene. You don't need to decipher all of these colors here. I'll paint this a little more clearly on the next slide. We can now develop these exposure maps for individuals as they move about their day and figure out where they're getting exposed to. This was a study we did in Fort Collins. You can see our sample size is going up. We've got 45 participants in this study, each measured on 9 different days. So a full day of monitoring, 45 participants. And what you can see here is your exposure to air pollution. The bottom is a little map where you can see someone's home and workplace, and they move in between. We're looking at 2 flavors of air pollution, the PM 2.5 and black carbon, which is like soot. And you can see in general, like, you don't get exposed to a lot of air pollution except in these little kind of concentrated moments, right? Whether you're on the street and a bus goes by, or you're in a crowded space, or you're in a restaurant. Restaurants actually have very high PM levels because they're often burning stuff and cooking stuff all the time. The other thing you see here with this plot is that most of the exposures, if you look at the right side, we're looking at home, work, transits, when you're commuting, whether you're eating out or other just things we couldn't figure out. Most of your exposure occurs at home. So that's the place you really want to intervene. You can also see there's kind of a log normal distribution here. The lowest exposure is like 4 micrograms, and the highest is closer to like 25 or 30. What's really interesting to me is that, yes, the most exposure occurs at home, but you look at just one participant. Over those 9 days, which are randomly assigned across the year, there's a lot of variability. It's not like one measurement is enough to get your exposure, which is a problem because we aren't taking enough measurements already. I also mentioned there's a filter in this device. So the nice thing about the filter is, in addition to all that sensor data, we can assay that filter for all sorts of stuff. Like if you're interested in the metals someone's exposed to, we can put it through an X-ray fluorescence. Or if you're interested in the microbiome, we can look at 16S RNA sequencing, or GCMS if you're interested in something like PFAS or benzene or other sorts of. That's really nice. So we have now started to actually put our effort where our intent was, in that, can we increase the sample size for air pollution research? This was a study, we actually just completed data collection. It's called SHEAR. It's a 3-year clinical trial. This clinical trial is looking at modern energy. So if you don't know anything about those air pollution exposures I showed you before, about half the planet wakes up every day and has to start a campfire in their kitchen as their only source of energy for their home. That's how they cook, that's where they get their light from, that's where they get their heat from, an open burning fire. You can imagine their equivalent is like 2-pack-a-day smokers. So they have pretty ill health because of all that biomass they burn. Our idea was, if we go into these homes and we give them LPG, so propane, and we give them solar power for light, will they be healthier as a result? So we look at things like blood pressure in the adults, and then we look at the trajectory of lung function growth in the adolescent children in these homes. The nice thing is that we enrolled 650 households, each with a father, mother, and child. So we're looking at about 2,000 people we're now able to study because this technology is easier to use and deploy, which I think is great. What did we find? We haven't unblinded ourselves to the health data yet, but the exposure data was pretty surprising. We found that the children had the highest exposure of anyone in the family. This was really surprising because you'd think that it would be the mother who would be the primary cook in these families, tending the fire and doing the cooking. It's not, it was the children. When we did our apportionment, most of the exposure occurred at home. Children are on that top panel. What you see is that around, let's see, 7 or 8 p.m., when most of the cooking happens, it's the child that gets the highest exposure. And we figured out essentially that these adolescent children are old enough to tend the fire, and that's their new responsibility. Something that was, we didn't expect to find. Compliance is an issue. Even with this lower burden technology, we measured each of these folks 7 times over the period of about 3 years. The accelerometer can be used to tell us whether they're wearing it, because if you're wearing this, there's just tiny fluctuations in the acceleration due to gravity around the device. And so we can basically figure out during the waking hours if you're wearing it. And what we see, of course, is pretty good compliance. We paid volunteers to wear it, but still declining compliance over the course of the study. Always a challenge for this technology. Last slide, and this is kind of a more humorous one. This was a study we did with asthmatic children. These kids are obviously very excited to wear this piece of technology for a day or two. The parents were less excited. One of the mothers came back and said, I thought you sent my kid home with an improvised explosive device, right? They thought it was going to explode. And this is not the first time this has happened to us. We actually had a participant leave one of the devices in a classroom, and the teacher called the police because they thought, like, what is this kid left in the classroom? And of course, when you let engineers design technology without enough social scientists and marketing people, you come up with something like you see in the bottom right corner there that is pretty threatening looking. So we put a cover on that weird cap, and so it looks a little bit less threatening like this, but still, what is that thing? And so I'm out of time, and I think I'm out of slides, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Time for a couple.
I just wanted to know, what is the approximate cost of your device?
Yeah, really good question. So that's like another fail on our part. So this device retails for like $2,000, right? So it is a good research tool. I mean, you can buy 20 of them for $40,000, and then you can study hundreds of people over the course of a year through repeated measures. It's still not cheap enough, though, to really scale up. And so, something we're trying to work on. Yeah.
I just had a question. I'll get into the mic. I couldn't help but start thinking about incidental findings as people are wandering around, and you find that some place is a high polluter or some place does any concern ethically around what you're learning about others as people walk around?
Well, we don't learn a lot about others. We do learn a lot about the individual wearing those. So we can tell if you're a smoker. We can tell when you're cooking, when you're cleaning. I mean, we can basically back calculate a lot of your activity from that exposure profile we have. And so there is a lot of private information we can extract out of the data that this provides from individuals. And so that's kind of a challenge for us in disclosing to people, we're going to get all this data. Yeah.
I was just going to follow up on that question and ask if you return results to individual participants so that they have a sense of where their individual exposures are and how they might change it, or if you keep it aggregated.
We actually have another clinical trial funded by NIH to go into the home and measure home air pollution levels, and then educate people on not only like what the levels are and how their activities create those levels, but what they can do about it. The bigger issue that we saw when we did that study is that, like I said, you don't get to choose the air you breathe. And if you have poor air quality in your home, it's very expensive to address that. There are ways to do it, but it's never perfect. Like if you have an unventilated gas stove, like to me, if I want to evangelize one more thing, like those of you who love gas cooking, that air is not healthy coming off that stove. If you're not turning on your fan, you're going to make levels that are in violation of the EPA outdoor air quality standard in under 15 minutes. So go induction on behalf of your health. And so but the point is oh, you've got a gas stove and it's unventilated. You're going to fill your air with nitrogen dioxide and ultrafine particles. It's a multi-$1,000 fix, either to change that for induction or to ventilate that stove properly. And then of course, do people turn on their ventilation when they cook? Probably not. So it's a hard problem to solve.
Do those room HEPA filters, they're 3 feet tall or something. Do they actually do anything to improve the quality of air in your home?
Yes, there's a much longer answer I can give you because I'm an aerosol scientist by training. Those instruments do work. They have to be sized correctly and they have to be maintained. So the filter inside that will last for about 6 months and then it gets pretty poor. But absolutely, those things do work. Yeah. Now, they work for particle pollution. They don't work for benzene. They don't work for nitrogen dioxide. They don't work for other sorts of things that can be in your air. But they do work for particles. And so like for those of us who live in Colorado, you should have one of those in your closet so you can create a clean room during a wildfire smoke event.
Separate question, just as you were talking about wildfires. If you live in a house with a swamp cooler, for example, should you also have a lot of those HEPA filters?
Technically wrong with a swamp cooler.
Okay.
As far as like conditioning your air. The best way I can say it is I filter my air knowing what I know. And where do I filter it? In my bedroom, because I spend 8 hours a day in there. And that's like, you might spend an hour in your kitchen, 2 hours in your living room, but you always spend 8 hours a day in your bedroom if you're treating yourself well. That's the place to intervene because you'll clean the air there and you'll do the most for your exposure reduction in that room.
Sorry, I just had a naive question. Most of your graphs had PM 2.5.
Yes.
What is that?
PM 2.5 is fine particulate air pollution. It's particles suspended in the air less than 2.5 microns in diameter, which essentially means that they stay airborne. They don't settle out in the air. Your hair is about 50 microns in diameter. So it's like 10 times thinner and smaller than your hair. You can't see these particles. In this room, it's probably 5 micrograms per cubic meter. With each breath you take in, you're probably inhaling about 10 to 25,000 particles around that size. Don't worry, we're not all going to drop dead. We've been doing it forever, but like they're there, you just can't see them.
Okay, online question. Those with, then we'll move on.
Yeah, this person's interested, I think, if you have any data regarding the quality of 16s from the samples. So I think that was a couple of slides back. Mainly, they're interested in bacteria.
Oh, 16 sRNA samples. So bacteria genotyping of these samples. Yes, you can do it. Typically, we measure PM10 when we measure for microbiome because it's larger stuff in the air that the microbiome typically populates. But it can be done. So we did a study on COVID in hospitals, and that's not bacteria, but it's an RNA assay we did. And as you'd expect, you can find it in the air, even in the isolation rooms for sick. I will say the other side of the coin is those isolation rooms do a really good job of cleaning the air. So there's there, but it can be seen.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.